It is often listed as the first air raid on mainland Japan in history, when 16 B-25B Mitchell medium bombers were launched off the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Hornet on the 18th of April 1942. Planned and led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, whose name is now synonymous with the daring raid, the B-25s bombed a series of military and industrial targets in Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Kobe, and Osaka, to the disbelief of the Japanese. It was revenge for the Pearl Harbor attack of the 7th of December 1941 and aimed to show the Japanese that their home islands were within range of U.S. aircraft. The Doolittle Raid, though undoubtedly an extremely brave and brilliant attack, wasn't repeated. Mainland Japan would be free of Allied air attack until mid-1944, when the U.S. advance across the Pacific had secured island bases for its long-range B-29 superfortresses. But what many people do not know is that the Doolittle Raid was not, in fact, the first air attack on mainland Japan. 4 years earlier, during an earlier campaign, an air force had launched a daring operation to attack the Japanese where they felt most secure, and amazingly had managed to get away with it. Before we get into that, a quick word from our sponsor. One of my ancestors was famous English King Edward III, but I don't have a title. That was until the good people at Established Titles reached out. Established Titles is a project based on an historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds, or lords and ladies in English. Purchasing as little as 1 square foot of dedicated land on the private noble estate at Edelston, Scotland, makes you a lord or lady. You will receive a unique plot number and a lovely certificate, and Established Titles also plants 1 tree with every order, and work with global charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts. You could officially change your name to Lord or Lady and get it on your credit card, plane ticket, and so on. You can even get it on your dating profiles. It makes an amazing last-minute gift. Established Titles is now running an early Black Friday sale. Plus, if you use the code MarkFelton, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/MarkFelton to get your gifts now and help support the channel. World War II's first battlefront was officially Poland, following the German invasion on the 1st of September 1939. By the 3rd of September, Germany's refusal to stop had brought the British and French empires into the war against her, creating a world war. But a huge war had already been raging for 2 years by the time Germany attacked Poland: the war in China. Japan had designs on China dating back to the 1890s, and in 1931-32 had seized Manchuria, a natural resources-rich province of northern China. Then, in 1937, Japan had launched a full-scale but undeclared war against China after manufacturing a false flag attack, the aim being to seize northern, eastern, and southern China, where all the main cities and industries were located. The Japanese employed brutality on a scale not seen since the Middle Ages, butchering hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and prisoners of war in appalling war crimes that even drew approbation from Adolf Hitler and other friends of Japan. The most notorious was the sacking of Nanking, the Chinese capital, in late 1937, when Japanese troops deliberately terrorized and massacred the population in a policy designed to frighten China into capitulating. Upwards of 80,000 Chinese women were raped, and between 200 and 300,000 Chinese killed, often in the most barbaric of ways. World opinion turned against Japan once evidence of her crimes became known via Western journalists and Red Cross reports, but it didn't stop the Japanese offensive. China kept fighting, its army suffering terrible defeats and retreating westwards into the country's interior, resisting where and when it could, though it desperately needed modern weapons and equipment. The nationalist Chinese Air Force decided that a strike against mainland Japan would give the Chinese a propaganda victory and raise national morale. But the Air Force was small and ill-equipped in comparison to the aggressive and modern Japanese Air Force. In order to bomb Japan, China needed to use long-range aircraft. Captain Shu Huansheng, an experienced pilot and instructor, decided to use the Martin B-10 bomber, of which China operated a handful, alongside its other bomber force made up of Heinkel HE-111As from Germany. In action since August 1937, few B-10s were still surviving or in service. However, 2 aircraft were selected from the 14th Squadron of the 2nd Bomb Group for the operation. The awkward-looking B-10 first flew in 1932, the first all-metal monoplane bomber. 348 would be built in several different marks. With a crew of 3, the B-10 was 44 feet 9 inches long, with a wingspan of just over 70 feet, and with a maximum airspeed of 213 miles per hour, a range of 1,240 miles, and a service ceiling of 24,200 feet. Armed with 3.30-inch machine guns, it could haul 2,260 pounds of bombs. Captain Shu selected 2 targets in Japan: Sasebo Naval Base, a huge Imperial Japanese Navy shipyard and base near Nagasaki, and the Yawata Steelworks near Kyoto. Helping him plan the mission was Lieutenant Tong Yangbo, who would command the 2nd B-10. However, it was soon realized that 2 B-10s would do very little damage to the selected targets. It would be nothing more than tiny pinpricks against Japan. It was then decided that bringing Japanese civilians' attention to the shocking behavior of imperial soldiers in China might be a better purpose for the raid, as many suspected that much of the cruelty and war crimes going on in China at the time were being deliberately suppressed by Japanese censors at home. Accordingly, 2 million leaflets written in Japanese detailing the rape of Nanking and other atrocities were printed. The raid's targets were now changed to the main civilian centers on the island of Kyushu, the cities of Nagasaki, Fukuoka, Saga, and so on. The raid would be extremely risky. The B-10s would fly unescorted straight into the heart of the enemy's defenses, and would have to make long overwater flights there and back. On the 19th of May 1938, each aircraft was loaded with 1 million leaflets, and the B-10s took off from an air base at Wuhan and flew to a forward base at Ningbo on China's coast to refuel. Lifting off into the darkness, the 2 Chinese bombers set out on the first overwater flight of 550 miles to Nagasaki, flying through bad weather which eventually cleared when they reached the city at 02:45 hours on the 20th of May. There was no response from Japanese defenses, and the 2 Chinese bombers reduced altitude and one dropped a flare to assist with the bombing. Both aircraft now released the first batch of leaflets over Nagasaki without incident. Splitting up, Shu and Tong piloted their planes to Fukuoka and Saga respectively, dropping the rest of their leaflets and also carefully noting Japanese military and industrial targets under the clear moonlit conditions. The Japanese eventually realized that enemy aircraft were over their soil and instituted an immediate blackout. But no flak or fighters could locate the Chinese planes. The B-10s met up at 0332 to scout together and after 30 minutes turned for home. Using radio direction finding signals transmitted from Changsha and Hankou, the 2 aircraft followed the beams home. But as they passed over Sanmenwan off the coast of Zhejiang province, Imperial Japanese Navy warships opened fire on them, but without effect. Captain Shu landed safely at Yushan Air Base at 0848 and Lieutenant Tong at Qingyuanpu at 0932. Later that day, the 2 B-10s flew back together to their home base at Wuhan to a hero's welcome from Chinese nationalist and communist officials, including the future Premier of China, Zhou Enlai. Captain Shu's exploits even made a 1944 issue of Life magazine, giving him the credit for having led the first military raid on Japan 2 years before Jimmy Doolittle. Shu later became a general in the Taiwanese Air Force and died in Taipei in 1984 at the age of 78. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.